Hi, everyone. Welcome to the breakout session A3. This is the Harvard Nutrition, Climate, and Sustainability Roundtable, getting the big picture in focus. We are going to be talking about how a university can design its sustainability platform, goals, and strategies, and the impacts to include food and the impacts on campus dining operations. We will hear specifically how Harvard has pursued this challenge and find out how students and faculty were involved in the process and check in on how it's going so far. And then we will have a Q&A towards the end, and I look forward to your questions. First up, we have David Havelick, who is the Sustainability Manager for the Office for Sustainability at Harvard. David, please go ahead.
Great. Hi, everybody. As Eliza said, I'm David Havelick, and I've been a sustainability manager in Harvard's Office for Sustainability for the past 4 years. And before that, I worked at the Harvard School of Public Health, Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health for 10 years. And today I'll be talking about Harvard's journey of promoting sustainable food by creating sustainable and healthful food standards and how that fits into our larger sustainability strategy. And hopefully other institutions can learn from this. And I'll make sure to focus in on how we set up a framework that tracks progress over time, that empowers others, and that acknowledges that we all have a role to play in creating a sustainable food system. So in this talk, I'll try to put that big picture into focus. So just to start off, just to give a sense of, you've probably all heard of Harvard, but just to give you a sense of how Harvard is set up, because that really influenced how we approached our food standards. So Harvard is a very large institution. We have 27 million square feet, which is about the size of Google, and almost 700 buildings, and we serve 10 million meals a year or more. And then it's our operating structure that is really important. So we have a really decentralized management structure. So each of our 12 grad schools and undergrad school and the college operate really independently. So each school can choose its own cleaning vendor, its own food vendor, et cetera. So this means that Harvard policies and strategies need to be designed with buy-in from all of the different schools, and it's going to apply to several vendors and not just one. So we couldn't just work with, for instance, Harvard University Dining Services. We needed to create a strategy that would apply to all. Now, the good part about this is things we accomplish here at Harvard through alignment and standards can then scale to other parts of our vendors' portfolios. So now just to give you a sense of what our process was. So as I mentioned, this was part of a larger sustainability strategy. Harvard has had a university-wide sustainability plan for the past, since 2015. And in there, it called for us to develop sustainable and healthful food standards and have compliance by 2020. And so at the beginning, as we were approaching these food standards, things weren't in focus. It was like, what do we include? What don't we include? What should this process look like? And so to start, we put together a multidisciplinary faculty food standards committee. You'll see some familiar faces here. Walter Willett, it was one of our co-chairs, and he'll be joining us later, hopefully, in this conversation. And it was also co-chaired by Professor Ari Bernstein, who's an environmental health professor at the Harvard School of Public Health. And also people like Emily Broadleib at the law school, who runs the Food Law Policy Clinic there. She had her clinic, for instance, look at other food waste policies and create our food waste policy. We also got input, of course, from students. So we looked to our Council of Student Sustainability Leaders for that. And all along the process, we worked with our food service vendors. They're the experts in this area. Many of them were already working on sustainable and healthier food. And we also, of course, needed their buy-in. So we met with them over the 2 years of this process to make sure that we were all aligned. And so then we looked to the research. So we grounded this in the latest climate and health science. We were lucky enough that the EAT-Lancet Commission on Food, Planet, and Health were coming out with their report just a couple months before our food standards came out. This was, authored by Walter Willett and many other scientists, and they were looking at climate and nutrition science together to create one cohesive vision for a sustainable food system. And here's a quote from the report: "Food is the single strongest lever to optimize human health and environmental sustainability on Earth." We also made sure to ground this in the latest nutrition science. So instead of looking to the USDA's My Plate, which is on the right side, we looked to the Healthy Eating Plate that's really based on research and was put together by scientists, including Walter Willett at the Harvard School of Public Health. You could see some differences here. Things like whole grains instead of just grains, healthy protein instead of protein. And we made sure this was the foundation both of our standards, but also how our vendors define healthy food. And then also we look to the menus of change principles, both for kind of underlying principles, but also because this provided a lot of great strategies we could make sure our vendors saw. And some of our major vendors on campus, Restaurant Associates and Harvard University Dining Services were already part of the Menus of Change Collaborative. And so in terms of defining the mission for the food standards, was we wanted, of course, to provide a more healthful food supply and sustainable food supply. We wanted to align our vendors, as I mentioned. We wanted to drive changes in the marketplace by sending signals, and we wanted to quantify our impacts and enhance food literacy. Now, while the original goal was to create standards, like a policy based on a set of principles, we realized early on that we needed more than a policy. We needed to create this real ecosystem that ensured accountability and that drove and scaled innovation. And we needed to create and share resources that addressed both the supply side and the demand side of the food system on campus. So with all of that background work, we settled on 6 categories and areas of focus. So climate and ecosystems, no surprise. Consumer well-being, this had a focus on nutrition, food safety, antibiotics use, and chemicals of concern in food packaging. We obviously had a focus on reduction of wasted food. If food waste was a country, it would be the 3rd largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions, so it was a really big focus of our work. Welfare of animals, education and food literacy, and of course, well-being of workers and communities throughout the value chain. And so by this point, things were starting to come into focus. So we do have these 2 pages of our food standards you can find on our website, and it gives a vision and approach in each of these 6 categories. And also we have a reporting structure where all of our vendors annually report in to this central food standards committee, and then they're planning to give out recommendations to our vendors for where they could make progress, where they could link up with new partners, where the knowledge maybe has changed, et cetera. So some of our next steps are to analyze the first year of reporting, to deliver those recommendations I mentioned, to continue sharing best practices across our food vendors, piloting and scaling our work, creating more resources, and then really focusing on the demand side. So just here's some of the action that's happened since we've released our standards. So we did ask all of our vendors to report how much red meat, how much poultry, et cetera, they buy. And that set us up as a university with all of our vendors to sign this Cool Food Pledge, which is organized by the World Resources Institute. Other signatories include groups like IKEA, Bloomberg, the University of Maryland, et cetera. And this group of institutions have made a commitment to reduce food-related greenhouse gas emissions by 25% by 2030. We also then have access to resources that we then share with our food vendors. Some of our vendors have been making amazing progress. Harvard University Dining Services did a plant-based chef training with the Humane Society of the United States. They had done that years ago. They just redid it again. They have an amazing food donation program, as you can see in the middle, where they take leftovers from lunch and put it into single-serving meals. And they also have an amazing peer-to-peer education program called the Food Literacy Project. Also, Harvard Business School. We teamed up all of our vendors with a group called Farm Forward to make sure we have a really clear path for getting higher welfare animal products. And they also have this leadership circle, which they sourced higher welfare eggs, so now they're part of the leadership circle. They also have a menus of change, more plant forward section of their cafeteria there, which is also exciting. And we really also saw the value in the demand side. Now, demand can change naturally. So these graphs just show on the left that students, Harvard undergrads, care about healthy food. And on the right, you can see more than half of them have considered changing the way they eat. And most often it is a more plant-forward diet. But we've also worked with some students and others on campus to pilot some interventions to nudge people toward more sustainable choices, like this Veritas campaign, which labeled food with their climate impact. We have a sustainable meeting and event guide on the left, and also a student created a plant-based eating guide on the right and featured some athletes and their plant-based diets. And of course, we really want to share our work so people can learn from it. We've presented at several conferences, especially in the higher ed sector. We signed that Cool Food Pledge, and also we're included as an example in this new Chef's Good Food Handbook. And also we've teamed up with groups like Default Veg to train our students and staff on the default veg concept, which you can do for events or conferences or in the dining hall. And we've shared this guide for nudges that was part of the Cool Food Pledge. And of course, some of our students have worked with the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative. So that's just a summary of our work. And now we'd love to hear your questions. I think Eliza is going to ask some questions, then we'll open it up to everybody.
Okay. So there are some questions that have come in from the audience, and David, I actually will also just first ask, you know, when you, I mean, you guys have done a just absolutely phenomenal job, and have, it seems like you found a lot of willingness on your campus, and I'm curious, when you talk to other universities, what kinds of challenges come up that are that make like replicating this challenging on other campuses, and you know, how are you working with other campuses to kind of overcome those things?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So increasingly, actually, not surprisingly, because we've been presenting on this work and sharing it, you know, on our website, universities, cities, vendors have been coming to us for help. And that's a great question. I think when I presented this first at a higher ed conference, I heard people walking out of the conference saying, "Oh, well, Harvard can do that, but we can't." And an answer to that is take what we've done. You know, what the hard work here, at least for us, designing these standards, was designing the standards, making sure we had the latest research, et cetera. Now we've encoded that into these standards. Now take what works for your situation. I think that's really resonated with folks, like, oh, okay, so we could just take this model and these priorities. So for instance, you know, there was a lot of work figuring out, should we care about water or biodiversity and stuff like that? And we really whittled it down to what we thought we could get data on, and where we knew the science was really clear. And so that's where we prioritized these categories. So hopefully that can help people. The other thing is that structure of, we are not demanding that our vendors move too fast. We're listening to them. We're creating a new definition of success, and then having them tell us, we'd like to make progress in this area, but it's just too expensive. And then we're able to hear, oh, well, that sounds too expensive. Let's link you up with, for instance, like Farm Forward, and find you a supplier of your higher welfare eggs at the same price. So that, for instance, happened at the business school. So creating this structure is opening up the dialogue and allowing us to solve challenges when we can, or hold them off till we can solve them in the future.
Awesome. And it seems like being part of that Cool Food Pledge that the World Resources Institute has organized means that you are on track now to reduce your food related emissions. And can you just tell us a little bit more about that target, and just like, it's because I think it's pretty amazing, and it's really cool now that there are emissions reductions targets in the food sector, which there just really hasn't been, right? Like, we've had them in energy for so long, but now we have them in food. And so yeah, I'd love to hear more about that.
Exactly. Now, just to note, it does at this point cost money to be a signatory, because you have access to their resources and things like that. Now, it is a group goal of the reduction of 25% of emissions by 2030. So each individual institution doesn't have to meet it to stay in. We'd like to. And what's really exciting, though, is some of our vendors. So for instance, Harvard University Dining Services, because of that, because we started more systematically collecting that data and converting it to greenhouse gas emissions through that partnership, They then worked with some students in the last month, or maybe a couple months, data analytics group, to start modeling different strategies for how to get there. So what if we reduced red meat by this percentage over this many years? Is that going to get us there? Is it not? So by having that target, by getting the data in really good shape, and by having kind of this common conversion rate to greenhouse gas emissions, now our vendors can kind of use that. And that's what's been most exciting to me is I didn't ask them to do that modeling. They found value in that. So that was pretty exciting. And then, like I said, this group is starting to create resources then for the vendors, nudges based on research, et cetera. Again, and also the menus of change principles and guides have been really helpful for them as well, because it's a common goal. All of these are related.
Thank you. Yeah, that is, I think you highlight a really key challenge in all of that I think a lot of people who want to reduce food emissions don't necessarily realize, is that there's a whole data component that is tricky, because this hasn't been done before really,
Yes.
to actually quantify and then try to hit those targets in a verifiable way.
It was very tricky, by the way. The first few meetings I had with food vendors, I think almost all of them said, I don't think we really can get you how much red meat we purchase in terms of one unified unit. But we got there, and it's through hard work, through working with data folks, et cetera. And it's true. I mean, this was true of greenhouse gas emissions originally. It wasn't, data sets were not created for the reason we're using them now. So it does take that work. And hopefully the more we do it together, the quicker we can make progress.
Hi, Walter, welcome.
Thank you. Overcame a few hurdles, but I'm happy to be with you.
Hi, Walter.
Great. Do we have time for Walter, do you want to give a sort of, I think we don't have a lot of time, but would love to hear from you if there's time for you to do a kind of quick version of your presentation.
Sure, right, and without the slides. Yes, it's really good to be with people virtually, even though we much prefer to be there in person at Hyde Park altogether. But this is good, and it's really important that we keep this agenda moving forward in the coronavirus environment and period here, because this issue of health and climate change and other environmental challenges is not going to go away soon. And in the end, this is going to be have a much bigger impact on health than the coronavirus. So we can't neglect it. And I'm grateful for everybody that's joined the conference. I was just going to start off and point out the fact that, like Dr. Schrag talked about with climate change, we are on a very bad track nutritionally and health-wise, especially in America, that the obesity prevalence is up to 42% now, and it's climbing inexorably. We see that among younger generations, heart disease rates are actually going up. They had been coming down for 60 years, and that's reversed. A lot of that is attributable to the obesity epidemic. We're seeing obesity-related cancers like colorectal cancer in younger generations going back up. That had been coming down for generations. And as you would expect, life expectancy has gone down 3 out of the 4 last years in the United States. We're now way behind any other economically developed country in terms of life expectancy, where we Americans live on average about 4 to 5 years less long than people do in Japan, a huge gap now. And within that, echoing what Dr. Schrag said about equity, the life expectancy and other health indicators are very unevenly distributed. In the COVID epidemic, African Americans, Latinos, and Native Americans are 4 to 5 times more likely to be hospitalized and die than white Americans. A huge disparity. A lot of that does relate, of course, to more riskier occupations and nursing homes, having to travel by subway, crowded housing. But diet and nutrition accounts for quite a substantial chunk of that too, because we've known for decades now that the risk factors for serious COVID disease, obesity, diabetes, hypertension, and heart disease are all much more prevalent in these minority populations. So what we're seeing happen acutely in this epidemic is really part of a longer term epidemic of non-communicable diseases that are driving down life expectancy in the United States. So we really, if we will get out of the COVID epidemic at some point in time. We don't know when, we don't know just how, but it will pass. But our goal should not be going back to normal, because normal was way off track. We really have to redouble our efforts to deal with these underlying conditions leading to shortened life expectancy and a lot of suffering, and that are also very unequally distributed in our population. So that's a very brief boil down of my presentation. There is more material online digging a little more deeply into these lessons learned from the COVID epidemic that we can apply to this challenge of poor nutrition and health and climate change. A lot of that is that we can't ignore the reality of the laws of nature, of physics, biology, biochemistry, by just denying that these are issues or by politicizing them. These are things that we need to come to all together, grapple with, and we need the inspiration, the creativity, and the energy of everyone who is attending this conference if we're going to tackle these problems and be successful. So I'm really grateful for everybody who's attending.
Thank you so much, Walter. There are a few questions from the audience around some of the specifics on the Harvard campus. This one popped out. What has been the biggest challenge in getting Harvard students on board with all of your efforts, David?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I think, you know, the biggest challenge is students, no one wants to be told what to eat by me. They don't want to be told what to eat by the sustainability office. They don't want to be told what to eat by the dining services who's running the dining halls. That's what we hear from the dining hall folks all the time. You know, we can't make them eat what they don't want to eat. Now, so that's been the biggest challenge, is we can't do it. What's been exciting and a lesson learned here is that though we can support peer-to-peer education, we can support students working with each other and creating trainings and guides and things like that, so they can have conversations together about, you know, why to eat healthier, etc. And the other thing, again, not to be spinning so positive, but is a university is this beautiful place where there's new people every year. So we're seeing, and by working with our food vendors, we were like, we're not just telling you to choose healthier, sustainable food and be nudging in that area for us. We're doing this because this is the future, and this is how you really nourish a community.
Can I just add a little bit to that? And David's doing fantastic work along with his partners in all of the Harvard dining groups, and it is a big, complicated group. But this combination of education, awareness, plus being able to put good examples on cafeteria line on people's plates that are both healthy and enjoyable. That's really where the food service industry can make a huge difference. There was a study going back to how do we make this happen? This was done in Cambridge, England. I don't think you mentioned it, David, because the time is so short, but it was so simple. Basically, they did a trial there where they, instead of having one vegan dish on the menu, they just upped it to two. Didn't say anything about try this or no education part of it, but just the fact that there were two options that made it much more likely that one of those would be attractive to people, and the consumption shifted very substantially just by having additional healthy, more plant-based options there. And that's something that I think any institution can replicate.
Yes, and some of our vendors already are. You know, like Walter, you and I had talked about it. I made sure our food vendors saw that study. And what's exciting is they don't now think that's just interesting. They think, oh, this is a way to get us closer to our goal. You know, and so that's what's pretty exciting. So those are turning into action on our campuses. Yeah.
Fantastic. Evidence-based changes. Well, thank you so much, Walter and David. Fantastic panel. And I think we are out of time, alas.
Thank you guys so much. I just wanted to pop in and say thank you to David, Walter, and Eliza. You did an amazing job. I will let you guys go, and I will let everybody know some housekeeping items. Thank you again.
Thanks.
Bye, Walter. We're now going to the networking break, and there are a couple things that you can do to make the most of your time there. So as Jackie mentioned, you can use the tabs on the left of your screen to check out a range of ways for you to engage with everyone who is also attending today, from your peers and suppliers to the presenters, through one-on-one networking. We also have virtual Meet the Author booth in our expo area with Walter, so you can continue the conversation that we just started. And you can also purchase his book, Eat, Drink, and Be Healthy, a Harvard Medical School Guide to Healthy Eating. You'll be able to share your screen and interact with Walter, so it's a great opportunity. You can also visit the Expo tab to visit with our generous sponsors who are making it possible to offer this program tuition-free. The booths will feature special presentations and videos, live demos, interactive small group discussions, and more. This slide here will show you what is on deck for this week, and the sponsors featured as well as their themed programming will change week to week. So we hope you'll check in here often to gain a variety of new insights. There's lots to see this week and in future weeks if you will be joining us. Don't forget that you're also entered into a raffle for each activity you engage in. And if you attend and participate in all 6 weeks, you'll have a chance to win free registration and travel to next year's Menus of Change conference. So hopefully we'll see you in High Park. Make sure to network. We'll be resuming programming on the stage at 11:40 in the stage tab, 11:40 Pacific, 2:40 if you're on the Eastern side of things, for a look into healthy, protective foods for our immune system. Enjoy networking and the expo booth until then, and I hope some of you will join Walter and I in the Meet the Author booth. Thank you all so much.